In 2020, we of course couldn't perform live, and so gave the performance of A Christmas Carol on Zoom. This was so successful in raising funds for the NSPCC that we are repeating this for those who don't live in Thanet and cannot come to our live performances locally in December. Not least of all our Dickens Fellowship members around the Dickens world who have been so supportive.
A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, read by the Dickens Declaimers from the Broadstairs Dickens Fellowship.
Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his name to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade, but the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hand shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew that he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. There is no doubt that Marley was dead, and this must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story we are going to relate.
Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. But Scrooge was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shrivelled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days, and he didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, nor wintry weather chill him. No wind blew bitterer than he. No falling snow was more intent upon its purpose, no pelting rain less open to entreaty. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, "How are you?"
On Christmas Eve, Scrooge sat busy in his counting-house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather. He could hear the people in the court go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The door of Scrooge's counting-house was open that he might keep an eye on his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed.
A Merry Christmas, Uncle.
It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew.
Humbug.
Christmas? A humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure.
I do. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough.
Come then, what right have you to be dismal? What reason do you have to be morose? You're rich enough.
Scrooge, having no better answer on the spur of the moment, said, "Ah," again, and followed it up with,
Humbug!
Don't be cross, uncle.
What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas! Out upon Merry Christmas! What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money, a time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should. Keep Christmas in your way and let me keep it in mine.
Keep it? But you don't keep it, uncle. Now, don't be angry. Now, come. Dine with us tomorrow.
Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said he would see him damned first.
I'm sorry to find you so resolute. I'll keep my Christmas humour to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, uncle.
Good afternoon.
The clerk, letting Scrooge's nephew out, let in a visitor. He was a portly gentleman, and now stood in Scrooge's office.
Scrooge and Marley, I believe. Have I the pleasure of addressing a Mr. Scrooge or a Mr. Marley?
Mr. Barley's been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night.
We have no doubt that his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than unusually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute. Many thousands are in want of common necessities. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir.
Are there no prisons? And the union workhouses, are they still in operation?
They are still. I wish I could say they were not.
Well, the treadmill and the poor law are in full vigour then? Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it.
Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind and body to the multitude, a few of us are endeavouring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time, of all others, when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. Now, what shall I put you down for?
Nothing. I wish to be left alone. Since you asked me what I wish, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there.
Many can't go there and would rather die.
Well, if they would rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon, sir.
At length the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat.
You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose?
If it's quite convenient, sir.
It's not convenient and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound.
It's only once a year.
It's a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the old day. Be here all the earlier next morning.
The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of a building up a yard, where it had so little business to be that one could scarcely help fancying it must have run there when it was a young house, playing at hide-and-seek with other houses, and have forgotten the way out again.
And then, let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock in the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not in impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That and its livid colour made it horrible. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled would be untrue, but he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in and lighted his candle. He did pause before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it, but there was nothing on the back of the door, so he said, "Puh, puh," and closed it with a bang. Up he went and locked himself in. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. Quite satisfied, he closed the door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. He took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel.
As he threw back his head in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room. It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing, and so did every bell in the house. The bells ceased as they had begun. Together, they were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder, coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door.
It's humbug still. I won't believe it.
His colour changed when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leapt up as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost," and fell again. The same face. The very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now. Though he looked the phantom through and through, though he felt the chilling influence of his death-cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, he was still incredulous.
How now? What do you want with me?
Marley's voice, no doubt about it.
Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Well, who were you then?
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. I cannot rest, I cannot linger anywhere. In life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. You don't believe in me?
I don't. No.
Why do you doubt your senses?
Because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are. Oh, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?
Man of worldly mind, do you believe in me or not?
I do, but why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide, and if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned into happiness.
You are fettered. Tell me why.
I wear the chains I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. It is a pattern strange to you. The weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself. It was full and heavy and long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago, but you have laboured on it since. It is a ponderous chain.
Jacob, old Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob. You must have been very slow about it, Jacob. 7 years dead and travelling all the time?
The whole time. No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse.
You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years.
Oh, not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever that may be, will find its mortal soul too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one's life's opportunities misused. Yet, such was I, yes, such was I.
But you were always a good man of business, Jacob.
Business. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business.
The ghost held a chain at arm's length, as if that were the cause of all its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again.
Yet this time of the year, the rolling year, I suffer most. Oh, why did I walk through the crowds of my fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to the poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me? Hear me, my time is nearly gone. How it is that I appear in this shape that you can see, I may not tell. I have sat invisible beside you many a day. Now hear me. I am here tonight to warn you that you have a chance and hope of escaping my fate. You will be much haunted by 3 spirits. Without their visit, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow. When the bell tolls 1, expect the second on the next night at the same hour, the third upon the next night, and when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more. And look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us.
The apparition walked backward from him. It beckoned Scrooge to approach. Scrooge followed to the window, desperate in his curiosity. He looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains, were linked together, none were free. The misery with them all was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters and had lost the power forever. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolt was undisturbed. He tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable. And being from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, he went straight to bed and fell asleep upon the instant.
When Scrooge awoke, it was dark. He lay until the chimes had gone 3/4, and he remembered that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. Ding! Dong!
The hour itself, and nothing else.
Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn aside. I tell you, by a hand. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white, as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it. It held a branch of fresh green holly, and its dress trimmed with summer flowers.
I am the ghost of Christmas past. Your past. Rise and walk with me.
He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped its robe in supplication.
I am mortal and liable to fall.
Bear but a touch of my hand there, and you shall be upheld in more than this.
As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon a country road, with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished. It was a clear, cold winter day with snow upon the ground.
Good heaven! I was bred in this place. I was a boy here.
Your lip is trembling. You recollect the way?
Remember it? I could walk it blindfold.
They walked along the road, Scrooge recognising every gate, post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church and winding river. Some shaggy ponies now were seen trotting towards them, with boys upon their backs. All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other.
These are but shadows of the things that have been. They have no consciousness of us.
The jocund travellers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named them, every one. Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why did his cold eye glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at crossroads and byways for their several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? What good had it ever done to him?
The school is not quite deserted. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still.
Scrooge said that he knew it, and he sobbed. That there he was, alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the holidays. A lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he had used to be. Scrooge looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head glanced towards the door. It opened, and a little girl came darting in, and putting her arms about his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother.
Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered, but she had a large heart. She died a woman, and had, as I think, children.
One child.
True, your nephew.
Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, and answered briefly, yes. Although they had but that moment left the school behind them, they were now in a busy thoroughfare of a city. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops, and here too it was Christmas time again. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked if Scrooge knew it.
Know it? Was I apprenticed here? Why, it's old Fezziwig. Bless his heart. It's Fezziwig alive again.
Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock which pointed at the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice.
Yo ho there, Ebenezer! Yo ho there, Richard!
Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow prentice.
Yo ho, my boys! No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Richard. Christmas Eve, Ebenezer. Now, let's get those shutters up before a man could say, Jack Robinson.
In came a fiddler with a music book, and in came Mrs. Fezziwig. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with the milkman. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and anyhow. There were more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. And when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone through all the dances, advance and retire, both hands to your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your partner, Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs and came upon his feet again without a stagger.
A small matter to make these silly folks so full of gratitude.
Small. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune. I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now.
My time grows short. Quick!
This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect. For again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of life. His face had not the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which so showed the passion that had taken root. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a morning dress, in whose eyes there were tears.
It matters little to you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no cause to grieve.
What idol has displaced you?
A golden one. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion, gain, engrossed you, have I not? You are changed. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly I have thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it, and can release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were. May you be happy in the life you have chosen.
She left him, and they parted.
Spirit, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me?
One shadow more.
No more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more.
They were in another scene and place, a room. Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like the last that Scrooge believed it was the same, until he saw her now, a comely matron sitting opposite her daughter. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge could count. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she, with laughing face, was borne towards it by the boisterous group, just in time to greet their father, who came home, attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. The shouts of wonder and delight with which the development of every package was received. And now Scrooge looked on more attentively than ever, when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at his own fireside. And when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father, and been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew very dim indeed.
Belle, I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon. Mr. Scrooge, it was. I passed his office window. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear. There he sat alone, quite alone in the world, I do believe.
Spirit, remove me from this place. Remove me. I cannot bear it. Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer.
I told you that these were shadows of the things that have been. That they are what they are. Do not blame me.
Remove me. I cannot bear it.
He turned upon the ghost and wrestled with it, if that can be called a struggle in which the ghost, with no visible resistance on its own part, was undisturbed. In the struggle, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright, and dimly connecting that with its influence over him, he seized the extinguisher cap and by a sudden action pressed it down hard upon its head. The spirit dropped beneath it, but though Scrooge pressed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light, which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom, and had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep.
Awakening in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again on the stroke of 1. He felt he was restored to consciousness in the right nick of time for the especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley. But finding he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains this new spectre would draw back, he put them, every one, aside with his own hands, and, lying down again, established a sharp lookout all around the bed. I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for any good broad field of strange appearances, and that nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. When the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling, and all this time he lay upon his bed, which had become the very core and centre of a blaze and ruddy light which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour. He began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room. He got up. He shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called him by his name and bade him to enter.
It was his own room, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were hung with living green. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light. Heaped up on the floor were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum pudding, barrels of oysters, juicy oranges, and bowls of punch. There sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, 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 to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door.
Oh, come in and know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me.
It was clothed in one simple deep green robe or mantle, bordered with white fur. This garment hung loosely on the figure. Its feet were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice and joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust.
Oh, you've never seen the like of me before. Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my older brothers born in these later years.
No, I don't think I have. I'm afraid I have not. Have you many brothers, Spirit?
Many brothers? Why, more than 1,800.
A tremendous family to provide for. Conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it.
Come, touch my robe.
Scrooge did as he was told, and holly, mistletoe, ivy, turkeys, geese, game, poultry, and fruit all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, and they stood in the city streets on Christmas morning, where people were scraping the snow from the pavement and from the tops of their houses. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate of the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavoured to diffuse in vain. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great, round, pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen. There were pears and apples, bunches of grapes made to dangle from conspicuous hooks that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. There were piles of filberts, mossy and brown. The grocers. Oh, the grocers! Nearly closed with perhaps 2 shutters down, but through those gaps such glimpses. The raisins were so plentiful and rare, the almonds so extremely white, the sticks of cinnamon so long and straight, the other spices so delicious, the candied fruits so caked and spotted with molten sugar as to make the cold onlookers feel faint and subsequently bilious. All the people were jovial and full of glee, and soon the steeples called good people all to church and chapel. Scrooge and the spirit went on to the threshold of Bob Cratchit's dwelling. Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, laid the cloth. Assisted by Belinda Cratchit and Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, a boy and girl, came tearing in.
What has ever got your precious father then? And your brother, Tiny Tim? And Martha weren't as late last Christmas Day.
The children shouted that Martha had arrived at last, and they ran to tell her of the goose. It really was such a goose.
Why, bless your heart alive, Martha, my dear, how late you are. Never mind, so long as you're come. Sit you down afore the fire and have a warm. Oh, there's father coming.
In came Bob, the father, his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas, for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported on an iron frame.
And how did little Tiny Tim behave?
As good as gold and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much, and he thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he'd hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant for them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see.
Oh.
Master Peter and the 2 ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Mrs. Cratchit made gravy. Master Peter mashed the potatoes. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. There never was such a goose. Its tenderness and flavour, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by the apple sauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Everyone had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. Mrs. Cratchit then entered with the pudding, like a speckled cannonball blazing in a half a quarter of brandy. At last the dinner was all done. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. Then Bob proposed.
A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us.
Which all the family re-echoed, and Tiny Tim, the last of all, said,
God bless us, everyone.
Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live.
I see a vacant seat in the chimney corner and a crutch without an owner carefully placed near. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, this child will die.
No, no. Oh, no, kind spirit. Say he will be spared.
If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Mr. Scrooge, I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
Founder of the feast, indeed. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it.
My dear, the children, Christmas Day.
Oh, it should be Christmas Day, I'm sure, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fella. I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's, not for his. Long life to him. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party. By this time it was getting dark and snowing pretty heavily, and as Scrooge and the spirit went along the streets, the brightness of the roaring fires in the kitchens, parlours, and all sorts of rooms was wonderful. Here, preparations for a cosy dinner with hot plates baking through before the fire and deep red curtains ready to be drawn to shut out the cold and darkness. There, all the children of the house running into the snow. Here again, shadows on the window blind of guests assembling. And there, a group of handsome girls. How the ghost exulted! How it opened its capacious palm and floated on, outpouring with a generous hand its bright and harmless mirth on everything within its reach. Again the ghost sped on. It was a great surprise to Scrooge to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognise it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, gleaming room with the spirit standing smiling by his side and looking at that same nephew with approving affability.
And he said Christmas was a humbug. As I live, he believed it too. Oh, he's a comical old fella, and not so pleasant as he might be. His wealth is of no use to him. He don't do any good with it. It doesn't make himself comfortable with it. And I'm sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers from his ill whims? Himself, always. Here, he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come to dine with us, and consequently, of his taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us, is that, well, he loses some pleasant moments which could do him no harm. He may rail at Christmas till he dies, but he can't help thinking better of it. I defy him. If he finds me going there in a good temper, year after year, and saying, "Uncle Scrooge, how are you?" and if it puts him in a vein to leave his poor clerk £50, there's something. And I think I shook him yesterday.
After tea, they had some music. When the strain of music sounded, all the things that Ghost had shown him came upon his mind. He softened more and more, and thought that if he could have listened to it often years ago, he might have cultivated the kindnesses of life for his own happiness with his own hands, without resorting to the sexton's spade that buried Jacob Marley.
Here is a glass of mulled wine ready in our hands at the moment, and I say, Uncle Scrooge, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man. He won't take it from me, but he may have it nevertheless. Uncle Scrooge.
Scrooge had imperceptibly become so light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return if the ghost had given him time. He and the spirit were again on their travels. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older.
Spirit's life so short?
My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight at midnight. Hark, that time is drawing near.
The chimes were ringing the 11:15 at that moment.
From the foldings of its robe, it brought two children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet. They were a boy and a girl, ragged, scowling, but prostrate in their humility. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing.
Spirit, are they yours?
They are man's, and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware them both, but most of all, beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it, slander those who tell it ye, admit it for your factious purposes, and make it worse, and bide the end.
But have they no refuge or resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward him.
The phantom slowly and gravely approached. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, face, form, and left nothing of it visible, save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach the figure from the night. Scrooge felt that the phantom was tall and stately when it came beside him, and its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread.
I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come?
The spirit answered not, but pointed onward.
You were about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us. Is that so, Spirit?
Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused a moment, as observing his condition and giving him time to recover, but Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon him, while he, though he stretched his own to the utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand and one great heap of black.
Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any spectre I have seen, but as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear your company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me? Lead on, Spirit.
The phantom moved away. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them. But there they were, in the heart of it. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of business people. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk.
No, I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead.
When did he die?
Last night, I believe.
Why? What was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die.
God knows.
What has he done with his money?
I haven't heard. Hasn't left it to me, that's all I know. It's likely to be a very cheap funeral. For my life, I don't know of anyone to go to it.
I don't mind going, if a lunch is provided. When I come to think of it,
I'm not at all sure that I wasn't his most particular friend, for we used to stop and speak whenever we met.
Speakers and listeners strolled away. Scrooge knew them and looked to the spirit for an explanation. Quiet and dark beside him stood the phantom with its outstretched hand. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town. The ways were foul and narrow, the people half naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. Far in this den of infamous resort there was a low-browed beetling shop where iron, old rags, bottles, bones and greasy offal were brought. Sitting in among the wares he dealt in was a grey-haired rascal nearly 70 years of age. A woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too.
Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did. Very well then. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose. If he wanted to keep them after he was dead, wicked old screw, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there alone by himself. Open the bundle, Joe!
It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots, and bed curtains.
Yeah, you don't mean to say you took 'em down, wings and all, with him lying there?
Yes, I do. Why not? I certainly shan't hold my hand when I can get anything in it by reaching it out. For the sake of such a man as he was, I promise you, Joe. Don't drop oil on the blankets now.
His blankets? Yeah, I hope he didn't die of anything catching.
Don't you be afraid of that. Huh, I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things if he did.
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. As they sat grouped about their spoils in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp, he viewed them with a detestation and disgust, as though they had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself.
This is the end of it, you see. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive to profit us when he was dead.
Spirit, I see. I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?
He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed. Now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed, on which beneath a ragged sheet there lay a something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark. A pale light fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed at the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, and longed to do it, but had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the spectre at his side. He thought, if this man could be raised up now, what would be his foremost thoughts? Avarice, hard dealing, griping cares? They had brought him to a rich end, truly. He lay in the dark, empty house with not a man, a woman, or child, to say that he was kind to me in this or that.
Spirit, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson, trust me. Let us go.
Still the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head.
I understand you, and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit. If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, show that person to me, Spirit, I beseech you.
The phantom spread its dark robe before him for a moment like a wing, and withdrawing it, revealed a room by daylight where a mother and her children were. She was expecting someone. At length the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door.
Is it good or bad? We are quite ruined.
No, there is hope yet. He is dead.
She was a mild and patient creature, but she was thankful in her soul to hear it, and she said so.
When I tried to see him and obtain a week's delay, he was not only very ill, but dying then.
To whom will our debt be transferred?
I don't know, but it would be bad fortune indeed to find so merciless a creditor in his successor. I truly believe we may sleep tonight with light hearts.
Let me see some tenderness connected with the death, or that dark chamber spirit which we left just now will be forever present to me.
The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house. Quiet, very quiet. Bob's son Peter is reading aloud from the Bible. And he took a little child and set him in the midst of them. And where had Scrooge heard those words? They were very quiet again. Mrs. Cratchit laid her work upon the table and put up her hand to her face.
Colour hurts my eyes. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home. Must be near his time.
Peter answered his mother, saying that he thought his father walked a little slower than he used these last few evenings.
I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed, but he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so that it was no trouble. And there is your father at the door.
Then the two young Cratchits got upon their knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "I don't mind it, father. Don't be grieved."
You went today then, Robert?
Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. I promised him that I'd walk there on a Sunday. My little child. My little child.
He left the room and went upstairs into the room above. There was a chair set close beside the child. Poor Bob sat down on it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. They drew about the fire, and Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew.
Heartily sorry for you, Mr. Cratchit, he said. Heartily sorry for your good wife. If I can be of service to you in any way, he said, giving me his card, that's where I live, pray to come to me. Now, it wasn't for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, but so much as, well, his kind way. It really seemed as if he'd known our Tiny Tim and felt for us. It made me very happy.
Mrs. Cratchit kissed him. His daughters kissed him. The two young Cratchits kissed him, and Peter and himself shook hands. Spirit of Tiny Tim, thy childish essence was from God.
Hector, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man that was whom we saw lying dead. This court through which we hurry now is where my place of occupation is. I see the house. Let me behold what I shall be in days to come.
The spirit stopped. The hand was pointed elsewhere.
The house is yonder. Why do you point away?
A churchyard. Here then the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one.
Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be only?
Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. The spirit was as immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave, his own name. Ebenezer Scrooge.
Am I that man that lay upon the bed?
The figure pointed from the grave to him and back again.
No, no, Spirit, no, no, Spirit, hear me. I'm not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been but for this intercourse. Why, show me this if I'm past all hope. Good Spirit, your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. I will honour Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that he teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone.
In his agony, he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrank, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in.
I will live in the past, the present, and the future. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas tree be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees.
He folded one of the bed curtains in his arms.
They are not torn down. They are not torn down, rings and all. They're here. I am here. The shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will. I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world. Hello there. Whoop. Hello. There's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. There's the corner where the ghost of Christmas present sat. There's the window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right. It's all true. It all happened.
Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet, fresh air. What merry bells! Oh, glorious, glorious! Calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes, he cried,
What's today?
Today? Why, it's Christmas Day!
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. Hello, my fine fellow. Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one? Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there?
It's hanging there now.
Is it? Go and buy it. I'm in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here that I may give them the direction where to take it.
Oh, the boy was off like a shot.
I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim.
He went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood there, awaiting their arrivals, the knocker caught his eye.
I shall love it as long as I live. I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has in its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Oh, here's the turkey. Hello, Whoop. How are you? Merry Christmas.
It was a turkey. My, he could never have stood upon his legs, that bird.
Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town. You must have a cab.
And the chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy were only exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again, and chuckled till he cried. Setting off, he had not gone far before, coming towards him, he beheld the gentleman who had walked into his counting-house not the day before and said,
Scrooge and Marley, I believe.
It sent a pang across his heart to think how this gentleman would look upon him now when they met.
My dear sir, how do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. allow me to ask your pardon, and will you have the goodness...
Here, Scrooge whispered in his ear.
Lord bless me, my dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious?
If you please, not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favour?
The gentleman shook hands with him.
My dear sir, I don't know what to say.
Don't say anything, please. Come and see me. Will you come and see me?
I will.
Thank you. I'm much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. Bless you.
He went to church and walked about the streets and patted children on the head and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He turned his steps to his nephew's house.
Is your master at home? Thank ye, he knows me. I'll go in here. Fred, it's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?
Let him in. It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful happiness. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. But he was early at the office next morning. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. He was a full 18 minutes behind his time.
Hello. What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?
I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time.
You are? Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please.
It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer, and therefore I'm about to raise your salary. A Merry Christmas, Bob. A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I've given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavour to assist your struggling family, and we'll discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more, and to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew. Well, some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle afterwards, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed,
Bless us.
God
Bless us, everyone.